I woke up to the sound of metal scraping against asphalt. A harsh, grinding pull that didn't belong anywhere near my driveway at 5 in the morning. For a split second, I thought I was still dreaming, until I heard a woman shouting orders like she owned the whole neighborhood. That's when I realized the HOA president, Karen Whitfield, was inches away from towing my car. And the wild part? She had absolutely no idea. I was the judge who'd signed 2 of her previous warrants. The moment I stepped outside, groggy and furious, her face turned the color of copy paper. It started about 10 minutes earlier, when I was still asleep after pulling a late-night shift reviewing case files. My car was parked exactly where I always park it, inside my driveway, well within my property line. But Karen had been circling the neighborhood for weeks, looking for any excuse to assert her so-called authority. She claimed it was abandoned, because I hadn't moved it for 2 days. 2 days. As if that wasn't normal for people who work long hours. By the time I stepped outside, the tow truck driver already had the hook under my rear axle. Karen was standing there with a clipboard, wearing that smug little smile she uses when she thinks she's about to win. I cleared my throat, and her whole body stiffened like a malfunctioning robot. "Good morning, Judge Davis," she stammered, instantly losing the faux confidence she'd walked in with. I didn't even need to raise my voice. All I said was, "Move the truck," and the driver backed off like he'd just been told the ground was electrified. But Karen wasn't done. She tried spinning some story about how she was acting in accordance with HOA Code, Section 7, which didn't exist. I knew because I'd forced the HOA to hand over all its bylaws during a previous dispute she'd stirred up. She was lying, and she knew I knew it. Yet she still kept going, rambling about property values and community standards. Before I could respond, she pulled out her phone as if calling backup would save her. But her shaky hands revealed everything. Finally, I held up a hand and said, "Karen, do you want me to read you the exact ordinance about towing?" Her eyes darted everywhere but my face. She hated being wrong, but more than that, she hated being caught by someone who actually understood the law, especially someone she'd tried to manipulate before. And even then, she had no idea. This was only the beginning of a much bigger mess she was about to create, one that would unravel her entire grip on the neighborhood. Absolutely unbelievable. Karen didn't retreat, not even after the tow truck driver scrambled off my property like he'd just remembered he left his stove on. Instead, she straightened her posture, squared her shoulders, and marched right up to me, with a clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white. That was always her tell. When her confidence cracked, she squeezed that clipboard like it was the only thing keeping her alive. "Judge Davis," she said, trying to recover her usual condescending tone, "I believe your vehicle still violates several standards outlined in our revised HOA maintenance guidelines." Revised. That word made me raise an eyebrow. Because I knew for a fact Karen couldn't revise anything without board approval, and the board hadn't met for months. I asked her calmly, "Revised when?" She opened her mouth, closed it again, then flipped through her papers, as if she might magically find something that would justify her stunt. What she actually found was nothing, because there was nothing to find. And as she stalled, the morning sun finally crept over the roofs behind us, revealing 2 neighbors peeking from their blinds. Karen noticed them too, and the moment she realized she had an audience, something in her expression shifted. Suddenly, this wasn't about towing my car. It was about saving face. She pivoted fast. "I'm simply enforcing community expectations," she declared loudly, projecting her voice like she was addressing a courtroom, instead of a tired judge in pajamas. "We've received complaints." That was lie number 2 for the morning. Because any complaints would have come across my desk. The HOA had been required to copy me on all enforcement communications after our last legal run-in. I let her continue digging her hole. She went on about deteriorating standards, irresponsible homeowners, and something about setting an example, though she never explained who the example was for. Finally, I asked, "Karen, do you remember the conditions of your probation agreement?" Her face froze completely. She remembered. I'd signed that order myself after she'd trespassed onto a neighbor's property to measure lawn length with a ruler. It wasn't criminal, but it was enough to put her under legal supervision for a year. She wasn't allowed to initiate enforcement actions without written board approval. And here she was, in my driveway, with a tow truck she had absolutely no authority to call. Her eyes thinned like she was weighing whether to run, lie, or double down. She chose the worst option, doubling down. This community relies on me to keep standards high, she snapped. If you won't cooperate, the board will take further action. There was no board action coming, but there was certainly action coming from me, and Karen wasn't going to like any of it. Karen stormed off my driveway like she'd won something, even though the tow truck had fled, and her entire justification had evaporated in front of the neighbors watching from their windows. But I knew better than to assume she was finished. Karen never backed down. She retreated only long enough to regroup and come back swinging twice as hard. So before heading inside, I pulled out my phone and checked the HOA communication portal. Sure enough, within 15 minutes, a new violation notice was waiting for me, time-stamped suspiciously early and signed only by Karen. The accusation? Vehicle abandonment, property neglect, and willful non-cooperation with HOA. Directives. It would have been hilarious if it wasn't so incredibly predictable. She must have typed it the moment she realized she couldn't tow my car. And the more I read, the more obvious it became that she had written it out of pure spite. But what Karen didn't know was that every communication she sent me was automatically forwarded to the court's oversight email anti-twice arrangement created, specifically because of her last outburst of power abuse. So I forwarded the notice directly to the HOA board members, all 5 of them, the same board members who had begged me months earlier to help rein Karen in after she nearly bankrupted the HOA with a string of unnecessary landscaping fines. They weren't fond of her, and they definitely weren't going to appreciate her sending unauthorized violation notices again. By the time the sun was fully up, my phone buzzed with the first reply. It was from the board treasurer, a soft-spoken accountant named Harold, who usually avoided conflict at all costs. His message was short. "We did not authorize this. We'll handle it." That alone told me Karen had crossed a line. Harold only used that tone when someone was about to face consequences. But before the board could confront her, Karen escalated. Around noon, she appeared again, this time walking door to door with a stack of papers, knocking loudly on every home within earshot. Curious neighbors stepped outside as she handed them flyers, accusing me of endangering community order and obstructing HOA operations. She even claimed I had threatened her authority, an interesting twist, considering she was the one who called a tow truck at dawn. I watched from my porch as she spun a dramatic tale, waving her arms and pretending the neighborhood was on the brink of chaos because of my defiance. Some neighbors looked confused, others looked annoyed, and a few, especially the ones who had previously dealt with her obsessive rule-enforcing, looked ready to riot. She didn't realize that her little publicity stunt was about to backfire spectacularly, because by evening the board would gather. And this time, I wasn't just attending, I was bringing evidence. By the time evening rolled around, the entire neighborhood buzzed with frustration. Karen had spent the day parading door to door like a self-appointed marshal, trying desperately to gather support for her imaginary crusade. But instead of uniting the community against me, she'd succeeded in irritating almost everyone. So when the HOA board called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, attendance was higher than I'd seen in years. Neighbors packed the folding chairs, whispering sharply about Karen's antics. She arrived last, chin lifted, lips tight, carrying her clipboard like a shield. I walked in with a folder full of documents, the ones she hoped I wouldn't bring. Harold, the treasurer, opened the meeting with a tired sigh. "We need to discuss several complaints submitted today," he began, glancing toward me. Karen stood briskly. "I can explain," she announced, already gearing up for theatrics. But Harold raised a hand. "You'll have a chance, Karen," His calm voice carried more weight than any shouting could have. I waited until the room settled before stepping forward. I laid out everything in chronological order. The unauthorized tow attempt, the fabricated violation notice, the flyers filled with false accusations. Then I presented screenshots showing the unauthorized communication she'd sent through the HOA portal, screenshots that had automatically forwarded to legal oversight. Karen's face drained of color with each page I placed on the table. When Harold asked whether she had board approval for any of her actions, she hesitated too long. "I acted in the community's best interest," she finally said, voice trembling with defiance. "Someone has to maintain standards. That line might have worked months ago, but not now, not after the fines, the overreaches, the probation, and certainly not after the morning's spectacle." The other board members exchanged looks, silently confirming what everyone already suspected. The secretary, Marla, pushed her glasses up. "Karen," she said firmly, "you violated your probation terms and multiple sections of our bylaws. You can't take enforcement actions alone. You know that?" Karen tried to protest, but Marla continued, "This is not protectiveness. This is obsession, and it's hurting the community." The murmurs around the room confirmed it. Even neighbors who once supported her shook their heads. The pressure grew until Harold finally delivered the verdict. Effective immediately, Karen. Whitfield was suspended from all HOA duties pending formal removal proceedings. Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in years, she had no script, no authority to cling to, no clipboard powerful enough to save her. She stormed out of the clubhouse, leaving her stack of flyers behind like abandoned debris. The room exhaled collectively. For once, the neighborhood felt lighter, like it had finally reclaimed itself from her rule. And as I gathered my documents, Harold approached and whispered, "Thank you for bringing this to light." I nodded. It was long overdue. If you enjoyed seeing Karen get called out and want to catch more wild HOA stories, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Drop a like if you thought Karen totally overstepped, and comment below telling us, have you ever dealt with a Karen in your neighborhood? I want to hear your stories.